Back to the NC State Insider Podcast. I'm your host and lead beat writer, Tucker Sennett, joining you here tonight for a little football discussion about NC State football with the transfer portal kind of wrapping up here. And I want to just kind of review what NC State has added out of the portal and just, address whether my opinion is that NC State has filled the primary areas of need that I think that it had going into the coming season. So NC State really focused on the offensive side of the football out of the transfer portal, added several players on that side of the ball, highlighted by a big group of wide receivers and Davion Dozier, Chance Robinson, Victor Snow, Tyron Warren, and then the two tight ends, Hunter Provience and Vander Plug. So a lot of additions there. And then Davion Goss, a running back from North Carolina, Jamarian McCrimmon, an offensive tackle from ECU, and Daniel Cruz, a guard from Texas, kind of wrap up the offensive side of the football. Defensively, NC State made its last couple moves, I think, earlier this week, adding Vander Plug, obviously an offensive player, but also adding Katron Evans from Marshall on Tuesday. And the rest of the defensive transfers, you got Harvey Dyson, an edge rusher from Tulane, Dakari Nelson, a linebacker from Penn State, King Mack, a safety from Penn State, Andre Evans, a corner from Georgia, Ty White, a corner from North Carolina, and then NC State added one specialist, Jackson Waller, a punter from Arkansas State. So that's 16 transfers. That's your transfer class for the year. Um, NC State could, in theory, make a couple more additions um, at any point. I believe. I'm not entirely sure how it works. The portal, there is no more spring portal, so there can't be any additional players after spring camp. There will be a story out today about NC State's spring camp schedule. They will be practicing throughout March and into early April. It's my understanding that there will not be a spring game, but a lot of it's going to be interesting to see what happens with a lot of these players because in years past of the transfer portal era, players have been able to jump back into the portal in that spring window and look for a new home. That's not a thing anymore. So those players are now going to be stuck in their schools, and I'm not sure what the workaround is going to be, but you know there will be one in this modern era because I doubt some of these players that feel as though they deserve playing time are going to stay in a place where they don't feel like that's a possibility. Now, that may not happen to NC State, but it could be a larger issue across the sport. We'll see what happens there. But back to my original question for this podcast, did NC State fill its positions of need? Did it do a good enough job with these 16 transfers? In my opinion, this is a really solid transfer class. You check some boxes, you make some of the losses that you had in the portal and to graduation a little bit less critical because, think about the players that NC State lost from this 2025 team, whether that was to graduation or to the portal. You're losing Justin Jolie, your star tight end. You're losing Terrell Anderson, one of your two or three best wide receivers, probably the best receiver on the 2025 roster. You're losing Jacarius Peak, your standout left tackle. You're losing on defense, you're losing Caden Fordham, Kean Sloan, and Sebastian Harsh, kind of the battery of the defense that wasn't perfect at times, but it got the job done, especially at the end of the season, and really started to fit DJ Elliott's scheme. You lose Devin Marshall, who's going to graduate, and the four defensive guys that I've said are all graduates. You're losing Brandon Cleveland, another graduate. So a lot of those pieces are gone. It's going to be difficult for NC State to overcome some of those things because those guys were not just good players for NC State, but they were really, really important parts of the leadership of the football program. And, that can be difficult to overcome in a short period of time. The good news for NC State is the players that stayed are a year older, and there's now some familiarity in the two new systems on offense and defense. So instead of, having to reteach some of those tendencies to everybody on the team, the coaching staff's going to have help from the experienced players that are back. And that'll kind of help NC State get this transfer class up to speed. The primary holes that I think NC State needed to fill, NC State, in my opinion, needed two offensive linemen. They did that. I think those are both starting caliber players. Could they use another depth piece in the trenches? Absolutely. I think that's going to be a really, really important position group in terms of the success of this 2026 roster, especially because, the Wolfpack is so committed to CJ Bailey. And if that group is not in A plus shape, not necessarily from a playing standpoint, but just from a depth and ability to the best, best ability is availability. And if that group can be on the field for most of the season, that'll be very, very helpful for NC State and for Bailey. I think McCrimmon and Cruz can help achieve that goal. I think those are both guys that are talented. I'm not a offensive line, guru or anything. McCrimmon was first team all conference for a reason in the American. That's not a pushover conference. That's a very, very solid league that had a college football playoff team. And, he proved that he was among the best offensive linemen in that league. So I think offensive line pretty successful in replacing needs. I think the receiver room very successful in replacing needs because NC State's offense is not going to be one that is sort of dependent on one pass catcher. Now, I do think there's going to be some growing pains in the red zone because they were very dependent on Justin Jolie in the red zone. So that'll be an adjustment. But I think this team kind of experienced a shift, and I've written about this a fair amount from targeting versatile wide receiver options and kind of training them to be good at multiple things. Now I think this group kind of has some real specialists again, some guys that are very good at certain things, some burner speed, some downfield threats, some guys who can do some things in gadget type situations with a player like Victor Snow. So I think there's opportunities to tinker with the wide receiver room. It's deep. These guys are probably all going to get a shot to play. And I think, that's really important when you have a young quarterback that you're trying to keep happy. I didn't think NC State really needed to explore the portal for a running back, but I think Goss is a very solid add, a change of pace back. It fills, an extra playmaker hole. It also fills, the keeping CJ Bailey happy with the Chaminade Madonna teammate hole. So that's certainly something to watch. So I think offensively, NC State did a very good job filling the areas of need. Defensively is where I have some issues. I think this team and just the culture is so predicated on linebacker play. And when you lose a guy like Caden Fordham, there's not going to be a instant plug and play replacement. And, I think Dakari Nelson will be a solid player for this NC State team. But I think they really needed to find somebody with a little bit more experience, even if it was at a lower level, whether that's a G5 player or even an FCS guy that has been in the heat of battle, and just somebody that they could kind of give the leadership responsibility to even as a newcomer at that position because they lost a massive voice in Caden Fordham, and this is going to be the first time in a while that NC State has sort of wandered the wilderness at the linebacker position. It's been sort of an area of strength for Dave Doran's defenses for a few years here. You're going to have AJ Richardson in the mix. You're going to have the youngsters, Lucorian Hodge and Kevon Carter in the mix. Now you got Dakari Nelson from Penn State. So I don't really know what the outlook is for that group, but I certainly think they could have used one more player. Still time. It might be a situation where it's a guy who comes in later and has to enroll, over the summer and is a little bit behind on some of the preparation. But it could also be, maybe Dakari Nelson is the answer. So linebacker, I think they could have maybe gotten one more player. I think in the secondary, they're really banking on development. Um, I think there are some major holes and issues in the secondary. I do think they added some solid players back there. I think, they really like Andre Evans from Georgia at corner. That's a guy that they wanted to recruit who didn't really get a shot with the Bulldogs and could be a better player than Georgia thought and could come in and start and prove Georgia wrong and be sort of the extra cornerback that this team really needs. I think King Mack is going to be really important because if he is either not available or not what he was made out to be, then it's going to look very similar to last year because all those safeties are back for the most part. Ronnie Royal back, Brody Barnhart back, Tristan Teasdale back. I think Assad Brown will probably slot into one of the nickel spots, even though he was pretty solid at safety. Um, but I think NC State's hope is that it's not going to have to play a bunch of redshirt freshmen again. I think they really hope that the experience and the growing pains that those players went through this past season defensively will pay off in developing them. And the last area I think NC State really could have used a little bit more help in was the defensive line. You bring in a guy like Harvey Dyson who can play that jack linebacker, edge rusher role, but they don't really have an instant plug and play replacement for Brandon Cleveland and a heavy rotation guy in Trevally Price, who wasn't always the most effective player, but he was always on the field. And that's a lot of snaps that you have to find a replacement for. And I think, Evans could be that option. I think Josiah Victor coming back is an interesting candidate at nose guard for NC State. But the defensive line is going to be a really interesting developmental group. And I think is an area where if they are going to add another player, that would be a good place to start. Having only added just one guy in the defensive line. So all in all, I think NC State filled the holes that it needed to, but I do think there are some certainly some needs remaining, and with the window kind of closed on enrolling, um, things could we'll see how spring camp shakes out. That's how I'll put it. And we'll have a better feeling of what things will look like after spring camp. There won't be a spring game, so we won't really see any alignment or anything, but um, it'll be a little more obvious whether this team, covered the bases well enough or if, there was a little bit of meat left on the bone with this transfer class. That's all I got tonight. As always, really appreciate you tuning in to the NC State Insider Podcast. If you want more of our content, go ahead and follow me on X at Senate Tucker. You can also follow our website at Wolfpack on SI on X. And of course, subscribe to the Sports Videos on SI YouTube channel for more episodes of the NC State Insider Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.